Okay, hi guys. Today we're going to talk about relative clauses. Relative clauses in German are very similar to relative clauses in English. What they do is they allow you to combine sentences. So you can have two sentences that talk about the same thing and you combine them into one without using a conjunction. But in place of a conjunction, you do need something called a relative pronoun. In English, we like to omit those in sentences, but in German, we don't. I want you guys to, right now, before I tell you what the relative pronouns are in English, think of a sentence that you think has a relative clause in it and write it in the box, including the relative pronoun. So do not drop the relative pronoun that links those sentences. Okay, so hopefully what you did is you took two sentences, combined them with something like who, which, or that. So the cup of coffee which Frau Busman has been nursing all day is cold. Very, very sad. Okay. In German, they function much the same way. So I can have two sentences like this. Wir besuchen unseren Onkel, and unser Onkel kommt aus Polen. When I have those two sentences, I have two things that are the same, specifically unseren Onkel and unser Onkel. Now, when I replace these with a pronoun, a relative pronoun, I would use der or den, depending on which way I'm going to write the sentence. That is because they have different grammatical cases. Wir besuchen unseren Onkel. This makes it accusative case because it's the direct object. We are visiting our uncle. In the second sentence, unser Onkel kommt aus Polen, it is nominative case because our uncle comes from Poland. It is the actor in that sentence. So, I'm going to use the second sentence and I'm linking it to the first one. So, wir besuchen unseren Onkel stays on its own, and I'm just going to add the relative pronoun der, and then I have some funky business going on with word order. When you have a relative pronoun, the second part, the relative sentence or clause, becomes a dependent clause. That means that you're going to kick the verb to the end just like you did with all of those subordinating conjunctions. So, aus Polen kommt. Notice, not in second place. It's been moved to the end. There's a bunch of information that says the same thing that I just said. Feel free to write it down if you need to. If my explanation made sense to you, that's fine too. Here's the English. We're visiting our uncle who comes from Poland. Now, just as a mini review, when you have an independent clause, this first part, that means that it can stand on its own. So I can drop the second part of that sentence and I still have a completely functional German accurate sentence. This second part is called a dependent clause because the word order is all messed up and just having this relative pronoun by itself doesn't make sense unless it is following something it has modified or replaced. So this part is dependent because it cannot stand on its own. So, here's another example. Ich lese das Buch. Du hast das Buch geschrieben. Ich lese das Buch, das du geschrieben hast, is the combined version of that. So in the first sentence, we have the direct object. In the second sentence, we have the direct object. In order to rearrange word order here, we have das, and then we are just going to stick with subject, the participle which usually is at the end, and we of course kicked the conjugated verb all the way in the end. The relative pronoun, as it says on the screen, is standing in place for the thing that it has replaced. So you're not repeating das Buch, you're just going to say das, so that you don't need to repeat this part. Okay, I have a bunch of examples and I want you guys to analyze them for me. We have, das ist der kalte Wind, der immer vom Norden bläst. So first of all, what is this little der referring back to? Hopefully you got that. It is referring back to the wind. So the wind has been dropped from that second sentence, and here's your verb all the way at the end. Now Now, the examples are going to get a little bit more complicated. Some of the stuff you're not going to be responsible for just yet, specifically the examples that have prepositions in them. They're actually easier to do than the rest of it, but I want you to just be aware that you don't need to know it just yet. So, ich liebe die Erdbeeren, die in Florida wachsen. So, I love strawberries, which grow in Florida. Diese Erdbeeren, aus denen diese Torte gemacht wird, kommen aus Plant City. These strawberries, from which this layered cake is made, come from Plant City. Now notice, the stuff that's in the same color here is a sentence that can function on its own. So when you have this type of a sentence, the relative clause is stuck in between because that relative clause is following directly after the thing that is being repeated, or in this case dropped. So the element that would be the same in two sentences, you're going to follow that directly with your relative clause. Specifically in the first one you have an accusative direct object, and in the second part you have a nominative subject, so you're going to go with D. Even if it were in accusative it would still be D, but if it were dative it would of course be den. In the second one, you have a dative preposition, so thus we have denen. Notice how that's a little bit funky. You're going to see that in a little bit. Okay, another set of examples. Diese Kirschen kommen aus dem Schwarzwald. Hier ist eine Torte, die aus den Kirschen gemacht wird. So these cherries come from the Black Forest. Here's a layered cake, which is made from these cherries. Now you can of course combine this another way. You can say diese Kirschen, from which this layered cake is made. So these cherries from which this layered cake is made are from the Black Forest. So if I take this sentence and put this extra information from here into it, it would look like this. Oh. Da sind die Kirschen, aus denen die Torte gemacht wird. So there are the cherries from which the layered cake is made. Okay. Der Garten ist klein. Der Garten, in dem die grünen Erbsen wachsen, ist klein. Die Trauben, aus denen der Wein gemacht wird, kommen aus dem Rheinland. Dieser Hamburger ist aus Hackfleisch. Hier ist das Hackfleisch, aus dem dieser Hamburger gemacht wird. Okay, so there are just a lot of examples for you to get a feel for these clauses. We are not going to worry about the genitive clauses just yet. So just ignore this whole genitive column. I want you to focus on the rest of it. Now notice, if you look at your case chart, this section is the only thing that is different from your regular der, die, das, der words on the case chart. So the only one right now that you need to remember that is really, really weird is denen. So for dative plural, you're going to have denen instead of den. Okay, we have a bunch of sentences. I'm going to give you parts of them in a second. These are just clues for you to use based on the meaning of the English sentences. I want you to use the meaning of the English sentences as a guide. I want you to go in and fill in all of the missing pronouns, relative pronouns that you're missing in these sentences. So, in your composition book, write down the whole sentence, write down the blank with a line, and then fill it in. I'm going to come around and check these for you.